So we all moved here to the UAE to make sure that our families were financially more secure so that we could make more money, save more money, and ensure that their futures were safe. But something that we often overlook is that our family's financial security is really based on the plans that we make today. And the sands are constantly shifting, right? Sometimes it's global shift in politics, sometimes it's rising costs. And we're not always sure that we're making the right plans to ensure that the next generation, that our family, our loved ones are truly secure. Well, on today's show, I'm very excited to invite onto the show Neeraj Gupta, who is the CEO of Policybazaar.ae. Welcome onto the show.
Thanks, Malvika. Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have you on to really discuss how families here in the UAE can ensure that they're not just making money for the now, for the great shopping and the wonderful international holidays and the great looking Instagram photos, but also that they're making plans that ensure growth, not just for themselves, but also for their families. Do you often see customers like this?
Definitely. We deal with all sorts of consumers, right? And everybody comes, as you rightly mentioned, comes to the UAE with a dream of making big money, saving big money. But eventually when people leave the UAE, they look back and say, okay, all my dreams, whatever I had hoped to save or build a big pot of money is not there.
Yeah.
And because you get probably sucked into the various spends that you can do in the UAE.
Of course.
So obviously our advice has been to the people from investment, insurance, to have a better future, as you mentioned, not for themselves, but for their family.
So I want to start with, why do you feel like financial security has become such a pressing concern for families in the UAE today? I feel like there's been a shift over the last couple of years, especially post-COVID. Mm-hmm. Do you guys see it in your work as well?
Yes. So couple of things have happened, I believe. UAE post the COVID has become a destination where people want to probably retire and stay forever, right?
Yeah.
Earlier, at least if you speak to most of the people, they would have come in here for 5-10 years, although they end up living for decades, having kids here. But at least the mindset shift has happened now.
Right.
Now people are not themselves looking at only 5-10 years to just have their working life here, make big money and leave. But they really want to spend their entire life here, retirement here. And as a result, it is becoming a lot more important for them to be able to secure their futures in the UAE, right? Be it for their family's education, for their kids' education, or for their family's lifestyle, or post-retirement lifestyle. So everything is becoming more and more important. And obviously, you'll also have to give it to that's a tax-free country.
Yeah.
So obviously, there is no social security from a government perspective because they're not charging you anything on your income.
Right.
So as a result, it is the onus is on you to build for your future.
That brings me to my next question, which is growth and protection, right? These are the two things that we prioritize. I think especially if you're the earning member of your family, the one that everyone's depending on, you want to make sure that tomorrow, God forbid, anything happens, your family's secure. You don't have to worry about school fees and mortgages and things like that. But simultaneously, you want to ensure that your money is working for you because you work so hard to make that money happen. So what's the importance of combining these two in the way that you plan your finances, and how can we make sure we do that?
Ideally, what you need to look at every stage of life, you have a different requirement. Right? If you're a very young and with family, right? If you're a bachelor, then obviously your requirements and needs are very different.
Yeah.
But I'll talk about very young families, right? You've gotten married and you probably have a kid now.
Yeah.
An infant for that matter, right? People rarely realize that something could happen to them and that the family will be literally having no money probably to take care, because what you were hoping is, how you hope for is, okay, I'm going to earn till 60, my income is going to grow, I'm going to build a wealth, and that will take care of my family. But what happens to you tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And that is where protection comes into play. Now, from a growth perspective, obviously everybody has ambitions to own a house or probably send the kid abroad from a perspective to US universities or UK universities.
Right.
And that is where the money that you have today is not going to be enough. It was lying there, right? So you have to invest it in the right instruments.
Right.
So at times what makes a lot more sense is combine these both, protection and growth, because it serves both the purposes. The growth will come in with the markets or howsoever from a long-term perspective. The important part here is to look at from a long-term perspective, not from a short-term perspective. People generally who've made wealth over a period of time, they've been very consistent about how they utilize their money. How do they invest their money? and the compounding effect starts to play a major role when it's a long term.
Absolutely.
Right? So that is where we continue to advise our consumers that protection and growth both are important, and at different stages everything is more important for you, right? But the protection needs to start very early on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, that brings me to my next question. I'm sure you've dealt with thousands of families and heard thousands of stories from here in the UAE. Insurance is just one of those things that you don't need until you need it.
Yeah.
And you always, when you don't need it, you're always thinking, I'm never going to need it until you really do. So have you had a moment where you've seen a family, been sort of rescued from the brink of crisis because they chose protection over...
Yes, definitely. So we had a consumer, obviously I can't get into the specific detail, but they had bought their health insurance through us, right?
Right.
And eventually when the claim came through and everything, unfortunately the person had passed away, right?
Right.
And now the person also had a term life insurance through us. We looked into our database and we figured out the person also has a term life insurance. The family did not know about it.
Right.
And they were planning, obviously, if you look at it, obviously the person is no longer there. The family is anyways emotionally very hurt, distraught.
Of course.
And they don't know what to plan about, right? But the things that they were thinking about is, let's get these bills settled, probably take the kids out of the school, move back to the home country, or just let their term end. And that is the time when we told them he also has a term life cover for about 1.5 million dirhams. We just need your help to provide us with these documents, and we'll ensure that within couple of weeks this money gets. And I can tell you the sigh of relief the family had.
Of course.
Because what they gave them is they gave them enough money to at least not think for next couple of years, but also gave them certain lump sum which they could invest and probably continue to build the life here. Or even if they go back to the home country, the money was substantial to have a very good standard of living and not think about the kids' education as such.
Absolutely. And I think when you've faced crisis like that, the last thing you want to be worried about is now pulling your kids out of school or having to, make big shifts. And just to have that, we often think of insurance as a very black and white, paper-driven thing, but it's not. It's about real life choices that we sometimes are forced to make. And I think any one of us could tell you stories from our own lives where we wish someone had thought of insurance first. I think another big thing when it comes to the UAE and the way that we see financial security is we're in the middle of the world. Every global event everywhere in the world feels like it just might have an impact on us. And that instills a lot of fear in some of the more traditional investors in the UAE. How do you feel that these global events sort of impact the way that we invest?
See, the world at a larger stage is getting connected, right? And UAE being to the dollar specifically, it has an impact, right? Because obviously if you look at it, it's a multinationalities, and this is also a country which deals with all the world, and has friendly ties with everybody. So obviously any impact does impact here. But the good part is if you look at it, the currency is pegged to a US dollar. At least for the foreseeable future, we continue to see US dollar to be a very prominent world currency where a lot of trade happens through that. So being pegged to that gives you certain comfort and security.
Right.
That whatever you are investing in the dirhams is being pegged to the dollar is gonna help you in the long run, right?
Yeah, and we've seen that happen, right? In our decades here in the UAE, there's always something going for the country. I think the next big question is, think about a resident here in the UAE who probably moved at a starting salary, a studio apartment, and has now sort of progressed through the rungs of the corporate ladder and is leading a team or has decided to grow in the country. What steps can they take today to ensure that they're making the financially wise choice when it comes to what they do with their money and their insurance?
See, one thing is protection. They need to think about protection from a family support system. If they are the family support system from a financial perspective, protection is the key. You need to insure yourself as early as possible. So term life insurance is one of the cheapest form of insurance available anywhere globally. And the earlier you get into that policy, you lock in your premiums. So a 25-year-old buying that term life, the premium is going to be a lot lower than once you get into the year 30 or 35, right?
Absolutely.
And typically what tends to happen is, as you rightly said, a person who moved in here, moved into a studio. Now coming from a country, for example, if you moved from India, suddenly you've come to the Dubai and you have your aspirations. probably of owning the best iPhones or owning the or
a nice bag, a cool car, a holiday,
or experiencing Michelin star restaurants, right?
Right.
Now all these things, yes, you should explore, but not at the cost of your future. Always,
correct,
right?
Right.
So I always advise people that not from your first paycheck. I do understand when it's your first paycheck, you want to explore, splurge probably on your family, on yourself. That's perfectly understandable, right? Because what are you eventually working for if not
for this?
For
right.
self-satisfaction,
Yeah.
right? But eventually you need to have a plan around it.
Yeah.
On very basic things, because as we all know, right, COVID at least proved one thing to the world, that there is no certainty. Anything could happen tomorrow, and everybody at least experienced that in their close family, close relatives, who was very heart and healthy, was no longer there after a week, right? So I believe that has given people a food for thought in terms of how do you plan about it. And we urge continue our consumers or in public in general, start thinking about it. Don't think this as a liability. Consider this to be an asset. Because when it comes, the need comes in, you will realize that this really works as an asset.
One of the things that I think most of us worry about, especially when we've started families, is what's going to happen to the kids' education if something would happen to us. Now, that something could be a disability, a critical illness. It could be what if we lose our jobs, or what if we, pass away. How can we make sure that our kids' education, and I think this is a very Indian value system, education above all else. How can we make sure that that always stays protected?
So for this, there are specific child plans, right?
Right.
What does the child plan do for you? Child plan has an important feature which is called a waiver of premium. So for example, you have a child which is 5-year-old and you're planning that at 18 or 22 years old, probably the big expense is going to come in from a graduation, post-graduation perspective. So you say, my son's or daughter's age is 5 years. I want to take a plan for next 15 years. So I will start paying premiums for the next 15 years.
Right.
Now the waiver of premium, what does help you? For example, the father dies, right? Unfortunate, but that happens. The insurance company will pay all the premiums in future. So what happens is your plan continues.
Right.
And when the maturity comes in, you get that lump sum amount of money.
Right.
Which you can obviously plan to fund your kids' education or any other dreams were there for.
Right.
So child plan becomes should be an important plan in your portfolio.
Right. So it's like your plan kind of buffers your kids' plan as well. It powers it up.
Yes.
Why is starting early so critical? Because I know that there's people out there listening, watching, just moved to the UAE, really excited about spending that money. Why should they be listening to this and listening to your advice?
Two things, right? One is if you look at protection in itself, like term life insurance, the early you get in, the lower the premiums are. And the other is the compounding effect on the growth, right? Anything that you start early, it might not look very big. So for example, a lot of people tell us, 8-10% of growth is nothing. But if you continue that growth over a period of a decade, 10 years, 15 years, then it becomes a substantial amount of money. So just to give you a simple perspective, if your money is having a growth of 10% year on year, in 7.2 years, the money doubles. People, when they see that growth happening, and if you talk to anybody today, everybody will have one thing to say, I wish I had invested 5
earlier.
years ago.
Oh God,
10 years ago. And that's the compounding effect, right?
Yeah.
That's the compound, because probably 8-10%. So for example, if you've invested $10,000, $1,000 does not look great. Okay, I've earned $1,000 in a year. What is that going to do for me? But $10,000 is going to become $20,000 and 40 and 80, right? And that is how the compounding effect happens.
When we're in our workplaces, we put in a lot of effort to double that salary.
Exactly.
If I told you to think about what your salary is today and think about how much effort you'd be putting in to double that number, all you've got to do is put your money into a plan which is giving you a 10% return, and the money will do just as much work as you will, which is, I think, the way it should work. What's the one piece of advice that you would give, especially UAE families?
As I mentioned, look at it from a long-term perspective. Don't look at it from a short-term perspective. And learn about financial. Financial literacy is loosely used in multiple ways, right? Financial literacy does not only mean that you are aware of what all options are available, but it also means at a very basic level on why is this important. And I believe what we are trying to do at Policybazaar is exactly that. that we want to ensure that the consumers understand why is insurance important, why is the term life insurance important, why is the child plan important, and I believe that is what the families also need to understand. Look at what their portfolios looks like. Nobody gets up in the morning and starts thinking, okay, I want to do financial planning, I want to do insurance, right?
True that.
So I believe the families have to start looking at this more of an asset than a liability, and have to spend their time on really planning out the future from a financial perspective.
Absolutely. Well, we move on to our next segment now, which is called Ask Away. It's a segment of the show where you guys write in with your questions about any sort of insurance product, and we get the best minds and the best experts in the business to answer that in the most honest and forthcoming way. Well, we've got a bunch of questions for you, Neeraj. So I'm going to start with Mariam's question. She comes to us from Russell Kema. She says, and I completely agree, Mariam. I feel you. She says, insurance feels really complicated. I don't know how to figure out the right balance between protection and investment for my family. The words, the jargon, the paperwork, it's all too much. Simplify this and explain it to me. What do I do next?
As simple, talk to an expert. And that is what our constant effort has been, to ensure that we simplify insurance for people. Unfortunately, it is a complicated world, and that is why you need experts. As you mentioned, right, your confusion, how much protection should I have, how much of growth or investment should I have?
Yeah.
And some people also have, okay, whatever I invest or save, probably from a protection perspective, I'm not going to use. So do I really need that? But having said that, speak to an expert, and one thing they will help you is understanding what your requirement is, what your priorities are, because they'll probe those questions, and probably you will end up answering the questions yourself.
I think two things, right, for Mariam. One is just keep asking questions. And I think the team at Policybazaar.ae will keep answering them. No matter how many times you ask, they will answer it over and over and over again. And secondly, don't be scared, because this is something that's worth educating yourself about. Whether or not you choose to buy, education is the number one priority. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, we're moving on to this next question that comes to us from Fatima. And I can understand where she's coming from. She says, premiums always feel like a burden. You know, you have to pay that extra few thousand dirhams, a few hundred dirhams even, and you feel like, but I could use this money for something that I'm actually going to use. Like, you know, something that I need to shop for, or something that I want to prioritize, maybe a new phone. How do you answer that? How do you prioritize insurance over, say, a new phone?
So that is where financial literacy comes in. And what we mean by that is, how do you start thinking as insurance as an asset rather than a liability or just an expense? So for example, if you look at your health insurance, right? If you were to get hospitalized, and getting hospitalized today with illness is not unheard of. And there are new illnesses coming in, new infections coming in, and the stay in hospital is becoming expensive. So today, if you were to pay probably 3,000 dirhams for an insurance policy, whereas if you are hospitalized and you had to pay 100,000 dirhams, what feels easier, right? Paying 3,000 dirhams.
Yeah.
And that is where we continue to tell consumers, look at this as an asset, not a liability, because it's going to help you in the rainy day.
You don't need it until you really need it.
Yes.
And that's the scary thing. So Imran writes to us from Mirdif. His opinion and his perspective has shifted dramatically post 2020. And I think that's true for a lot of us expats. COVID changed the way we saw risk in general.
Yes.
It changed the way we saw life, the way we saw health, the way we saw family, the way we saw protection. And the second thing he brings up is actually currency swings. I think whether you're from India or from Pakistan, we've seen a big shift in the last decade and a half. When I moved to the country, we were at 12. That was the currency exchange. And today it's 24 to the Indian rupee, and Pakistan even more so. So how can insurance cushion families against shocks like these in real life?
So you need to invest in a stronger currency, and a lot of people do not have that option. But you being in the UAE, you're blessed to have that option to invest in a currency which is dirhams pegged to a dollar, which will protect you from your own home country currency depreciating. It just gives you that comfort. So just understand, right? If you would have sent 1 million dirhams 10 years back, 15, it will be about 1.2 CR in India. Today, if you send it, it's almost about 2.4 CR.
Yeah.
So the money has doubled by just being here from an India perspective.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that is how the power of currency is.
Got a message that's come in from Rajiv. He lives in Al Nada and he says, as an expat, he always worries about sudden job loss or illness. This is, and we've seen it happen, right? We've seen companies downsize, we've seen companies restructure. All of us have had a friend who went to work one day and then got a message saying, we don't need you anymore. How does insurance help secure the family? Because the first thing that comes to your mind is, oh my God, what's going to happen to my family? What's going to happen to my kids' school, fees, life?
Okay, so if you look at it, there are two aspects to it. One is the job loss, right? So from a job loss perspective, you have a job loss insurance, which insures you or secures your income for the next 3 months, 6 months, depending on the plan you take.
Right.
So that gives you a certain comfort, right? Because it gives you probably enough time to look for another job.
Right, buys you some time.
Exactly. And when it comes to illness, so there are plans specifically meant for that, which is critical illness plan. So for example, if you have a critical illness, these plans will pay out you a lump sum. See, one thing which a lot of people don't realize is if you have a critical illness, two things happen. One, you cannot work, which means your income is not coming. And second, you have to increase your expenses because you have to do the treatment. Right. So that's a double whammy for you. And that is where critical illness plans becomes a lot more important.
Aisha's written to us. She said she moved to the UAE a couple of years ago. She works with a great IT company in Internet City. Hi, Aisha. She says that she gets health insurance and life insurance from her company. Does she really need even more insurance than what she's getting?
So it depends on two things. One, are you looking at health insurance from a perspective that what the company is covering? Is that enough? One, you have to figure out, is that plan enough? Secondly, what about if you have a job loss tomorrow? Then you're not going to have an insurance, and that is where your personal insurance is going to kick in. Similarly, on the life insurance, the company might protect you with a certain sum insured, but your liabilities might be a lot more. Then what happens? And that is where you need to evaluate your portfolio and what your financial health looks like, and basis that take a decision. But what you need to also plan for is, if tomorrow you don't have this job, would you be secured and financially secured?
Absolutely. And I think that's a big question, especially here in the UAE. We got the next question that comes in from Farhan. He lives in Business Bay. He says, how much should I ideally allocate from my monthly salary to the insurance-linked savings plan that you've been suggesting?
There is no thumb rule on that, what percentage it should be, right?
Right.
Typically, one thing people should be very aware of is, if you have regular increments, don't take all the increments and part into your expenses. Majority of the increment portion should go into your investments.
Right.
And in your investment portfolio, that is where investment linked ULIP plan, unit linked investment plan comes into play.
Right.
So that is how you need to think about it. It's not that it is the only instrument, but it needs to be a very important instrument in your whole portfolio.
Right. So think about what you're making this year, and then think about what you're going to be making 3 years from now, or what you were making 3 years ago.
Exactly.
And see whether your lifestyle has eaten up all of those lovely increments that you got.
Absolutely.
Those lovely pay raises that you got.
Yes.
Right? Great. Thank you so much, Neeraj. This has been an eye-opening conversation. I think if there's one big takeaway from all of this, it's that we all came here so that we could feel more secure. Our families could be more secure. We could be financially more well off. So that's what we should be focusing on. And there are great ways for us to be able to do that. So thank you for all of your expertise, and keep listening and keep watching the Policy Project podcast.